happy for you to ask questions as we go along. So what I'll do is I'll keep an eye on both the chat and on people's hands, and I'll interrupt Anne-Marie and Lynn if necessary, if there are questions to be asked. Please don't shout out because it can be very distracting for the speakers if you're shouting out as they're delivering their session. And on that note, given the absolute lack of noise, I guess most of you have got your yourselves muted, which would be really helpful. Thank you. Just remember to switch yourself back off from mute if you need to ask a question. So, unless anybody's got any questions that they wanted to raise immediately. Nope, nothing there. Great stuff. So, Anne-Marie, I will leave you to introduce yourself, and then Lynn, presumably you'll introduce yourself at some point during the presentation as well. So it's over to you for a case study around Bradford District Care and how you got yourselves to be assessed. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Just share my slides. Can everybody see those? Yeah.
Yeah, you're not on presentation mode though. You're on. We can see your slides to the side.
Right. Okay. That better?
Yep. There you go. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So as David says, I'm Anne-Marie and I work in finance at Bradford District Care Trust. I'm the assessee. I'm the assessee point of view today. And apologies, I can't see any of you now. So if anybody puts the hand up, I won't be able to see you. But I can pick up any questions as we go through. What I thought might be just useful is just explaining who we are as an organisation. We're part of West Yorkshire ICS. We are mental health, learning disabilities and community organisation. We're CQC rated good. We've been a foundation trust since May 2015, which is when I joined the organisation in 2006 to start looking at foundation trust status. So it did take us a while to get there. Our turnover last year was 216 million. So we're relatively small, but not one of the smallest, but definitely not one of the biggest. We've got about 3,000 staff and we provide services to Bradford and also Craven, which is quite a rural area. So we've got quite a mixture of services and geographical areas that we cover. Okay. So our finance team, I'd say we're relatively small. We've got about 30 people. That does include cashiers as well over our two main sites. We're split into three main teams: financial management, financial accounting and capital, and specialist finance, which is my team, which is basically everything else that doesn't fit into the first two teams. So costing, reporting, planning, contract income, and we also have R&D as well. About half of the team are full or part qualified, so I think that's probably maybe quite unusual for some teams. We have got quite a few people who've been there a while and are fully qualified through studying at our organisation. We were level 1 accredited in January 2020 and level 2 September 2023. So you can see there was quite a bit of a gap between them. Part of that was COVID, and part of that was just, I suppose, us taking our time to get us to where we needed to be to put ourselves forward for the level 2 accreditation. Okay, so that's a bit about us. So I was having to think when I pulled these slides together, because obviously it's a little bit of a while since we did our accreditation process. It was June 2023, even though we got accredited in the September. That's when the main meeting was to approve our application. So it's quite a while ago. But actually, thinking back, I don't think I really appreciated how much our level 1 evidence would be looked at as well as the level 2. Because our level 1 had been quite a way before level 2, I just assumed that the level 2 would sort of replace all the level 1 evidence, but it didn't. So we did have to update some of our level 1 evidence because obviously things move on. It's 3 years, 3.5 years. So that was one thing definitely that I would say that I learned from the experience. We had 107 items of evidence for level 1. And you'll see further on we had quite a lot more for level 2. One of the key things was recording our meetings, so like our full team meetings, our training sessions. We tended not to record them even though they were on Teams. Some of the training sessions we did, but not as a matter of course. So it was hard when you were trying to sort of pull the evidence together to actually have a recording of things. So we had to make a conscious effort to record some of the things we were doing. It's okay to talk about it, but you really need that proper evidence to back it up. The other thing as well, we decided from the outset we wanted it to be a whole team exercise with obviously 2 or 3 key people coordinating, of which I was one. So we also had our FSD lead and the Deputy Director of Finance. We were the sort of key coordinators. But we did set up quite a number of separate sessions for different people from the team just to go through the evidence, what we thought the evidence should be, and for people to actually have the dedicated time to pull the evidence together because it is quite a big undertaking. Even though you know, oh well, I've got this email, that email, I've got these minutes from this meeting, just to give people that dedicated, protected time to actually think about the evidence and actually provide it. We found that really useful. Not realizing our areas of strength. These were the things that we thought everybody else did really well. Business contingency planning sessions. We have an annual session with our emergency planning lead who comes to one of our full team meetings, and we have a proper go through of if you were in this situation, what would you do? So it's like a proper run through every year. And we actively update our BCP and look at that at least probably twice a year. We have a finance rep who goes to the BCP meetings, and they're, I think, once a quarter. So we're actually doing quite a lot for that. And I'm sure other people are as well, but that was one thing that was mentioned that we seem to do better than some others. The business partnering model, we've got the business partnering model for our team. And whilst it's predominantly financial management, we do sort of try and apply that model to our FA team and to my team as well. So it's not just about being just finance and focusing on that. It's having that wider view and having that wider opinion and trying to bring all the strands of things like activity, finance, HR all together. So it's a bit more of a streamlined service for the services. So that was another area. And the apprenticeship levy usage and reporting. We report on our usage as an organisation for the apprenticeship levy monthly to one of our main committees. It's the main subcommittee to the board. And also we use the apprenticeship levy quite a bit in finance for any developments, whether it be studying or we've had somebody who's done some leadership development. We try to maximise our usage of the apprenticeship levy wherever we can. And the final thing was equality, diversity, inclusion. That's probably the nature of the organisation that we work in. We're a care trust for mental health and learning disabilities and community services. It's a real sort of main strand of the thinking of our organisation, and that obviously is part of how that works in our team as well. So we've got a wellbeing rep, we've got an EDI rep, and we've got deputy reps as well. So we do try and actively engage in our organisation and wider with the EDI agenda. Okay. Yeah, one of the big things, don't underestimate the time it takes to pull the evidence together. I'd said in level 1 we had about 100 and odd items. Level 2 we had an additional 630. That may well be because we went a little bit overboard and making sure we had loads and loads of evidence to support anything that we said. We did have additional 58 items requested through the assessment process, and I suppose that was more around where we maybe hadn't had things documented as well as we thought, because I think there was a lot of good work going on and it was often hard to document, which I said earlier, because we didn't always record things. We didn't always have minutes for various meetings. They were sort of done more informally. So yes, there was quite a lot of evidence we had to pull together, and obviously coordinating that is a job in itself. But all the team pulled together, so I was really proud of them for doing that. We did duplicate evidence where it was applicable to different sections for ease, and we rag rated our evidence as well. I think that was one of the things is the description of the evidence is almost more important than the evidence, because you're actually trying to pull together how you think you achieve that particular standard. And that for me, we went through that several times. The three key leads, the deputy DOF, me, and our FSD lead, and we also went through it with the DOF a few times, as well as the full team. We sort of had it back and forth. It changed a number of times while we all went through it, and contributed our ideas. We gave a unique reference to each evidence comment that we made, so we could reference it with the evidence, so it made it hopefully as easy as possible. I think I flicked on too quickly. For the assessors, we wanted to make it as straightforward as possible, because it was all basically done in a day, because we wanted to hit the September meeting, because obviously we'd had a 6-month extension on the 3-year life of the level 1 assessment, and we didn't want to miss that. So we had to get everything done, the meetings, the review of the evidence, the discussions, everything done. And I think there was probably just an odd meeting afterwards, but it was mainly on one day. What else? Yes, we also put who was responsible for putting the evidence in the folders, just because then it was easy if there was any more information that was needed to say, right, well, Sarah, can you look at that? Or Johnny, can you look at that because you've provided that? So the burden just wasn't on those 3 key people. Documents can provide so much. Better evidence is obtained through conversations, and I think that was one of the main feedbacks from Ben and Lynn, who did the assessment. They got so much more from talking to people in the organisation, in the services, and our team in particular, than what we'd actually put down in the evidence. And I suppose that's learning for us to actually think a bit wider. We tend to be a bit modest and conservative when we put things down in writing, but actually, we agreed with everything they'd said and everything they'd pulled through. It was just really how we described that. We treated the process actually of preparing for the assessment, as well as the assessment, as a way to challenge ourselves on what we thought our strengths and weaknesses were, and to try and get some real benefits for a team. So not just seen as a process to get an assessment status at the end of it. It was really to try and say, well, let's have a look at this. Are we doing this in a way we want to be doing it? And if not, let's change it. And I suppose it's the next part really. We really wanted it to be something where, if there's things that need improving, or we want to dedicate some time, I know we can do that anyway, but we wanted to try and make that part of this process, so there weren't, more than half a dozen processes trying to run at the same time, because this did take up a lot of time. We wanted the team really to be involved in that, planning for the future, things that we didn't normally do, like strategies for talent development and things that you just don't seem to find the time to do. That's what we were trying to do, to try and develop those sorts of softer things that, yes, it doesn't mean to say that we will get the job done any differently, but hopefully it'll make the team be in a better place, and that's what we wanted. And lastly, just say thank you to our assessors. They were very supportive and very helpful to us in that stage of our journey. And I think at the end, all I did was, you probably won't be able to see this at all, but this is just an example. The top bit's an example of the standard, and the green bit is the evidence comment. And then to the right of it is just referencing all the different evidence that backs up every single statement. You'll be able to see it when you get the slides. And then this at the bottom is just an extract of, this was all the evidence just for that one point. And you can see how we've structured it. It's just to give you a bit of an example. Okay, and I think that's me.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Are you okay to run the slides?
I am, yes.
Perfect, thank you.
Just before we
so
move
first
on,
of all, I'll just
Lynn, just
introduce
before we move on, can we just
Yeah.
double check? Sorry, can we just double check there's no questions that anybody has specifically for Anne-Marie at this point, and we can always come back with questions at the end if necessary.
I can see there's one in the comment about rag rating.
Yeah, I've responded to that. I'll pick it up when
Yeah.
in my presentation. Okay, good stuff. Thank you. Lynn, carry on, please. Thank you.
Yeah, so first of all, I'll just introduce myself. My name's Lynn Tallentire. I'm Deputy Finance Director at Midlands and Lancashire CSU. We are a Level 3 accredited organisation, imminently about to do our re-accreditation presentation and hopefully retain our status. What I thought I'd share with you initially is why do I do this? Because accepting this is an add-on to what your job is day to day, and I know as finance people we're all busy, I thought I'd share with you what motivates and drives me to do it. So personally, I got a lot from going through the accreditation process, and I wanted to add back at the end of going for our level 3. I'll be open as well. I'm quite nosy. I like to look and see what other organisations are doing. And as the phrase goes, pinch with pride. So every assessment I have been and done with an organisation, there is something that when I've been in there as an assessor, I've thought that is really good. That's better than how we do things. So I use it as an opportunity for me to learn as well. It is also a great opportunity to network with like-minded colleagues as well. You know, as they say, your network is your net worth. Well, I greatly believe that if you can surround yourself with a group of people who you can work with and share ideas with and turn to if you're facing challenges as well. So that's why I'm an assessor. So I'll talk you through a little bit about the process we went through and some of the things I've learned doing assessments. One of the things I will say is that the assessment process in the Northwest is currently different to the rest of the country. Now, I do assessments in both bits. So I'm sure that David will go on to talk about that in a little bit more detail later, but if not, I can cover it off if you need me to. So one of the things that I will say as a pre-work is once you're assigned an organisation to work with, meet with them as soon as possible. And as part of that meeting, agree a clear timetable. And by that, I mean, when do you expect to get the evidence together by? When will you, as assessors, have done the initial review of evidence and feedback? When is going to be the day you come in to do the assessment? The more you can agree as a timetable up front and be clear on expectations, the easier it will be as you flow through the process as well. One thing I will say is there is a brilliant document on one NHS finance website called an Assessor's Guide. That is great for giving you an overview as the process as an assessor. I would personally allow a little bit more time than that guide suggests. So one of the things I've tended to find is quite often you go in, you do the assessment, and there may then be follow-up evidence you want to see, and the organisation needs to pull that together, then you need to have reviewed it again. And I'm not sure the timetable or that the timeline suggested in there allows for you to do that, really. I would say be really clear about your expectations about what you want to receive. So having done a few assessments now, I know what a good collation of evidence looks like and what can help an assessor. So what Anne-Marie flashed up on screen, that little box where they'd outlined the evidence they'd given you, and then cross-reference that evidence, and it was all loaded to a SharePoint, makes it much easier as an assessor. Doing that cross-referencing, and explaining the context. So to you, it might be really simple and clear that we have a SID meeting and we have a PDG meeting. And if you're coming into an organisation as assessor, you have no context of what that means. What are those meetings? Are they formal? Are they informal meetings? So helping your organisation to understand that if they can give you that context up front, it becomes easier for you as an assessor to review that evidence as you go through, because you understand the context of it as well. I have also shared at the preliminary kick-off meeting a copy of a good example of what collated evidence looked like. So that RAG rated schedule that Anne-Marie popped up, I've shared those with organisations to say, you don't have to do it like this, but here's a good example of how to do it. The other thing I would say is, and Anne-Marie touched on this, and I've seen it in a couple of organisations now, because in the rest of the country, apart from the Northwest, level 1 is a self-assessment process. Quite often you go in to do the level 2 assessment and they're not expecting you to look at their level 1 evidence, and it hasn't been updated and is maybe a couple of years out of date. So when you're having that preliminary meeting with them again, I would be making sure that they are aware that you will look at their level 1 evidence and that they've collated and refreshed that, so that you can understand, so that it's all there for you. Because there's nothing more disheartening than you go in and suddenly go, yeah, by the way, there's loads more evidence I need. I would personally say, depending on how many assessors are on each assessment, I tend to set aside half a day to a day to review the draft evidence. And I do that before we go into the meeting itself, go into the assessment day. And what I always endeavour to do is give some feedback on that before we go to the assessment day, so that the organisation can be trying to pull together additional evidence where we think there's gaps. Sometimes you've got to handle those conversations carefully. I've had a scenario recently where the evidence schedule looked brilliant and they'd explained everything, how it worked, how they did it, but they hadn't uploaded half the evidence. They hadn't uploaded business continuity plans or copies of minutes of meetings. So actually, when I went through and checked one of the areas, even though the words sounded great and they'd ragged it as green, I had to rag it all as pretty much red, because I was like, what you're saying is perfect. I just need to see it. That's what I need. And we ended up going back to them and having a conversation with that organisation to say, look, to go for the timetable you want to go with, there is an awful lot of work to you be ready for the assessment day. We should almost put the question back to them to say, have you got capacity in the next 2 or 3 weeks to get all that together? And they made a decision to delay their application because it was going to take them longer than that. So, don't be afraid of discussing gaps. I have yet to do an assessment where I've walked in and everything is there that you will want to see. There will always be gaps, no matter how hard organisations try. So moving on to during the assessment process itself then, as I said, I do an initial review of the evidence pre going in for the assessment day, and I effectively rag rate it from an assessor perspective, and where there's gaps, I'm then very specific about what I'm looking for. So an example of that might be, we issue monthly month-end packs or budget packs, whatever you call them. If you've only shown me 1 month's worth, I'll ask for a couple of other months or a couple of different services, just so that you can evidence it's embedded and it's not just, oh, we've just produced a one-off. One of the things I would say is look out for policies and procedures and the timeliness of those. So we have had scenarios before now where you've had a policy that says it will be looked at annually and you're given a policy that's 4 years out of date. Now, I'm not saying that policy or procedure is wrong. It might still be perfectly valid, but that would be where I would go back and say, oh, it says you should review this annually. It doesn't appear to have happened. Is there some more evidence? As I touched on, look at evidence over a relevant time frame as well. So things like if you need an annual training plan, I'd expect to see at least 1 or 2 years worth of training plans there so that you can show, you know, it is embedded, it is part of your process. And on the day itself, you'll run a number of interviews with people, and they can range from FD, budget holders, the project team who are generally running it, and a range of staff across the organisation, across finance as well. I always like to select the candidates off the structure chart that we'll try and meet with. That's where we start normally. Then you find some people are off and you've got a to and fro. But I also use that as a little bit of an opportunity to ensure that I'm covering staff from across the finance team at different qualification levels, in different sub-teams within finance, and also trying to ensure that I pick up on different EDI characteristics. So making sure I've got a mix of male and female, a mix of different ethnicities. So again, I'm using the opportunity to have those conversations really to sort of just understand more about the organisation. The final bit on this that I wanted to touch on was, for me, this was a great tip that I was given, and it was level 1's about ensuring that you've got robust processes and things in place for the finance function. Level 2 is about that being embedded with the wider organisation. And level 3 is about embedding and adding back to the wider system. And that's just useful, I find, to bear in mind when you're going into an organisation and where they're up to. So once the assessment day itself has taken place, be clear about the additional evidence you're asking for. What is it you're asking for? When do you want to receive it back? Draft the report sooner rather than later, because as the assessors, you have to write a report that goes to the committee to support the recommendation for the accreditation. Maybe this is just my brain, but I find if I don't do it sooner rather than later, it feels 10 times harder to do it 2 weeks later. And because I read back my notes and I think, what did I mean by that? Use other assessors out there as a bit of a sounding board if you're unsure. So I promise we are a friendly bunch. And if you have a scenario with an organisation where you're like, they've given me this, but I'm not sure it completely meets the requirements, have a discussion with them, have a discussion with other assessors, because they will also have a view. And I think it's useful sometimes to have that sounding board. The report you send to the committee does need to be of sufficient detail. I haven't had this, thank goodness, but I have heard of scenarios before now where they have been sometimes sent back and been asked to be expanded because they were only like 1.5 sides of A4. And they're expected to be a little bit longer than that. Finally, I was just going to cover some top tips. In my view, assessors are there to help organisations achieve the accreditation. You're also there to uphold the standards as well. it isn't a black or white pass or fail in my view, and it's worth bearing that in mind as an assessor. So there are specific elements where you've either got it or you've not got it, so it is a bit more black or white. But for quite a few elements, sometimes it's helping the organisation talk through what the aim of that requirement is. And I will guarantee that 9 times out of 10, they have evidence. You may even reach a point with an organisation where they've got lots of evidence, but maybe they're missing something. And I'll use ML as an example here. We didn't have the preferred employer status for one of the accountancy bodies because we only had one person in our team of 100 registered with that accountancy body. Between our initial level 3 and our reaccreditation, we had 2 or 3 other people join. And when the assessors came in, we hadn't applied for it being open. And they quite rightly challenged us and said, well, hang on, you've now got more people in your organisation who are registered with that body. So what we agreed with the assessors is they would flag that that wasn't in place at the time they came in, but whilst we were finalising the report, etc., we would already start work on it and get that in place. Now, we've actually managed to get that in place before the final assessment presentation. I would also say, remember how much effort it takes to apply for these things. So, you know, it's really easy to come in as the assessor sometimes and be the, you haven't done this and you haven't done that and you haven't done the other, where there's a team of people who've probably been slogging their guts out in the background on this. Every organisation I've been into has been welcoming. Every organisation has been responsive. I get loads from it personally, but happy to answer any questions anybody has.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Lynn. So there are a few questions in the chat. We'll go through some of those. I do apologise where I've said I'll cover this in my session later. I promise that I will where I've said that. And my other comment will be that Lynn, you obviously listened to me very carefully. We've done training sessions before because you've covered up a lot of what I'm going to say later. So thanks. Good to know you've listened anyway. So let's just go through the questions. So Vicky, you asked about RAG rating. That's hopefully now that's clear. It's red, amber, green, depending on the quality. I will talk about that later in my presentation. So I've added an extra category. We'll come to that, as I say, later on. Then again, Vicky, you've asked what good evidence looks like. So I'll jump in first, and then Lynn, Anne-Marie, if you want to make a comment, that'd be helpful. It's really hard to say, Vicky, would be the honest answer. It depends on which of the criteria you're talking about. So let me give you an example. One of the criteria is that the finance director's job description has to include responsibility for finance the development of the finance staff. That simply needs to be a copy of the job description with a relevant passage highlighted. Something like do all staff have a job description and an up-to-date appraisal process in place? You couldn't possibly expect every single JD and every single appraisal to be logged somewhere on a file for you, but it would be useful to have a couple of examples. And then when you go and see the team, one of my first questions to the people we'll talk to, and I will cover this later, is do you have a job description? Is it up to date? So it really does depend on which of the criteria you're talking about. But bottom line is it's up to you as the assessor to say whether or not you're happy with the evidence that's being provided. Lynn, Anne-Marie, did you want to add anything to that at all?
No, I think it, like you said, if it's certain criteria, it's examples I think I look for, but then certainly use the interviews you do with staff and with the wider organisation to assess some of the other points as well, because it backs up that evidence or can raise queries that you need to follow up in some cases.
Yeah, I agree, Lynn. Thanks.
I'd probably just say that, I mean, good evidence is different for different people. We just tried to evidence what we'd said in our statements as much as possible. And that to me was good evidence. If you've got a general statement and you can't really back it up, then it's not going to work, is it? You're going to get asked for some evidence through the assessment process. So we made sure that we had at least one thing, if not more, for each statement that we made in the evidence statement in the middle, the RAG rating bit.
Yeah, thanks, Amri. I think that's really important. I would say that I did take a sharp and take a breath and said there were 630 items of evidence in your folder. That sounds like a lot to me, but it's thorough. And what I would say is that as an assessor, you don't have to look at every single piece of evidence. If you look at 2 or 3 and they for one criteria and you're happy with that and you think it backs it up, you don't need to look at all of them. But if you have some doubts, it's good to have more there rather than less. Thank you for that. Just moving on, Robert, I will come back to how long it takes. I think Lynn gave you an idea that it depends on what you put into it yourself, but I'll come on to that later. If I don't, please do remind me at the end of my session. David K. Hi, David. Hope you're well. You've asked about implications of delaying an application. I think I'll pick up on this, and again, Lynn and Anne-Marie, if you wanted to say anything, that would be great. Or if there's anything you want to say from an FFF point of view, Kaya. I think it's important that you set the timetable in terms of doing the review to give yourself an opportunity to ask for more evidence and to give the trust a chance to pick that evidence up and let you have that in time to meet the deadline. So I always get the dates wrong. Let's say that the submission date is the 31st of August. I wouldn't be doing my visit to the organisation on the 30th of August, because you're clearly not going to be able to write your report and get any extra evidence gathered in time. So I would probably give myself a month before the deadline in terms of having the meeting and then writing the report. So hopefully you set the timetable that Lynn talked about, which I'll come on to in a moment, in such a way that that's not going to be an issue, David. If there was a real struggle to get evidence, then I think that would have to become a discussion between the assessors, Sophie and the team at NHS Finance around what that meant for that organisation. I would hesitate to say it will definitely cause a downgrade, but I think there might be implications if no evidence was coming forward. Kaya, anything to add to that from your point of view?
I think that's about right. Sophie Rowe is the best person to contact if you do have any further questions. But yeah, definitely give yourself at least a month.
Thanks,
David. Kaya. What I'd just say as well is the example I gave of the organisation was they hadn't used their 6 months grace period, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So they were able to use that 6 month period to allow them to delay their assessment itself sort of to the next session, which I think was 3 or 4 months later. So in that case, that was okay.
Yeah. Great, thank you. David, did you want to pick up on that?
Yeah. Thanks, Lynn. I must admit, unless you said it, and apologies if I missed it, the 6 months grace that you just referenced then, can you just describe what that means in practice? Because I don't think I've heard that before. That'd be great.
Yeah. So it's been around for a while, David. It's certainly always been in the Northwest process, which is broadly the same as national process. Just Lynn's right. There are some differences. Basically, that we have all the Northwest level 1 assessments are done on a peer review basis, and we have our Towards Excellence group, which kind of oversees the reports before they go into the FLC. Those are the only real differences. So what that means, David, is that if your 3 years is due to expire at any level, and you have good reason to extend the period, you can ask for an extra 6 months to gather the evidence and get everything sorted. There is on top of that, there's an additional 3 months, but that's very much sort of something crops up where the finance director goes off sick and we can't speak to them, or we had an example with Warrington Trust, for example, where I don't remember, David, but their offices caught fire and they had to move and something like that. We give an extension for that, but basically it's a 6 month grace period. Yeah.
Great, thanks, David.
Sam, moving on to your question around audits, I will pick that up, I promise. I'm going to offend any auditors on the call now. Hopefully it's rather more carrot than stick, the way that we do things. But yeah, it's very similar to an audit. Joe, I promise I will pick up the issue around whether we do it on Teams or face-to-face in my session. And I think that's it in terms, if I don't, please come back to me. That's it in terms of the questions in the chat. Does anybody else have anything they wanted to ask Lynn or Anne-Marie before we move on? Nope. Okay, so Anne-Marie, Lynn, thank you so much. If you are able to stay on the call, that will be really helpful. I think if you've got something to rush off to do, obviously we understand that, but often people have questions they want to come back to at the end of my session after the break. So if you can hang on, great. If not, we'll feed any questions back to you via email, and I'm sure that I think Kaya or Sophie or someone in the team will make sure that everyone gets hold of those. But thank you very much for your time, much appreciated.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to do a very brief session now on what we're looking for in an assessor. I'm just going to share my screen, so bear with me a second. So can everyone now see my screen? Yeah, great stuff. Okay, thank you. So this isn't going to take long. It's one slide, well, 2 slides including introduction. You'll be pleased to hear, and then we'll have a quick break before we go on to the session at 3 o'clock. So this is briefly what we're looking for in terms of becoming an assessor. That what we suggest you need as characteristics in terms of being able to run a good assessment. So basically, we need somebody who is relatively senior, somebody who works in when I say a strategic role, that's something that's overlooking more than one specific area of the finance function, because of the next 2 bullet points, which is that really you need to have a breadth of experience as a finance professional, an understanding of most of the areas of what happens in the finance team, because you're going to be assessing evidence across all areas of the team. So if you are very much a specialist financial accountant and have very little knowledge of management accounting, for example, it's going to be quite hard for you to assess some of the evidence provided. So we do need to have somebody who's got a good understanding across the breadth of what finance is. And also you need to have a certain degree of self-confidence and an ability to stand by what you're saying. So what I mean by that is, if you say that, and Lynn's just alluded to this, if you say that a piece of evidence isn't enough or something else is needed, or a good example from what Anne-Marie was saying, someone says, oh yeah, we've reviewed our finance development strategy, we do that at our senior team meeting, but it's never minuted. You need to have the self-confidence to say, actually, I need to see that as a note, please. And it doesn't take a leap of imagination to see somebody in a relatively junior post having to stand firm with the director of finance saying, no, I need that evidence. Might be quite tricky. So you need to have that self-confidence, that ability to stand firm and say, sorry, I understand what you're saying, but I really need to see this. Again, to go back to that carrot and stick approach, hopefully in a friendly, constructive way. But even so, you need to be able to say, my view is the one that holds sway here. Obviously, you need to have a knowledge of the Towards Excellence processes. I will provide a link in my session after the break of our process and guidance document, which is something that we in the Northwest work with colleagues at 1NHS Finance to make sure the document's the same across all areas of the work. That's really helpful in terms of just understanding that and what is required of you. Ideally, you will be from an accredited organisation. It was interesting that Lynn's last point on her presentation was, remember how much effort you put into getting your organisation assessed. And I think that's really important. If you've been through the process yourself, you understand it from the point of view of being an assessee. Once you become an assessor, then you know having that fellow feeling, I think, is really quite important. This point about detailed methodological approach, I probably don't need to say to a bunch of accountants. I guess that covers most of us most of the time. But if you do need to have a particularly detailed way of working, an ability to deal with a lot of information in a way where you can synthesize and understand that fully and get that bigger picture from it. You will need enthusiasm. You will need a willingness to commit to the process. It does take we'll come on to stage again, but probably about 5 days in total to do the assessment. So it's quite a big ask. But I do know from a lot of colleagues, Lynn and others, that it's quite a nice way to get a bit of a break from the grind of what you're doing daily in the organisation, and go and visit other organisations and see some good areas of work in there. And I don't think I can say this any clearer than Lynn did. It's that being happy to share knowledge, take knowledge from other people, take learning from others, bring those things back into your organisation. So those are the kind of skills we're talking about. Hopefully all of those of you who are on the call and are interested in being assessors would see yourself being painted in that picture there of what it is that we want from you. That's all I want to say. Hopefully that makes some sort of sense. We will share this slide with you after the session. Does anybody have any questions about anything that I've mentioned there? Vicky, hi.
Hi, David. Thank you. So just when you said about ideally you're from an accredited organisation, does it matter what level it's accredited at?
No, I don't think so. No, and we certainly, it's not a stipulation. It's not a red line, but I just think it gives you that understanding of what the process is. So
Yeah.
no, I'm looking. I can see Kaya on screen. She's not shaking her head saying I've got that wrong. So no, I think as long as you understand the process, that's the main thing, really.
Yeah. Okay.
Anything?
Thank you.
Is that would you agree, Kaya?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I can see you nodding it. That's great. Okay, thank you. Vivian, you've got a question. Oh, I think you're on mute still, Vivian. Nope, still can't hear you. Nope. Do you want to type it into the chat, and we'll pick it up after the break, if that's okay? Jennifer, your question in the chat: how do you become an assessor? Who do you need to contact? That will depend where you are. Sorry, if you're in the Northwest, you can contact either myself or my colleague Jackie Bowman. If you're from any other part of the country, you need to contact the One NHS finance team, and they'll make sure that you are brought into the process. What we tend to do, what we try to do, is to give you a first assessment as a shadow assessor. So you'll work with somebody who's experienced, you'll sit in with them, see them going through the process, and then we'll let you loose on an organisation. Kaya, just shake your head or nod if I get this wrong. In the Northwest now, we always have at least 2 people doing each assessment, because we recognise that it's too much for one person to do. I think that's the same for the One NHS finance process as well. Kaya, is that right? It's at least 2 people.
I'm not entirely sure on that one. I have to check with Sophie. It sounds about right, but I'll check with Sophie on that one. Okay,
that's great. Thank you. It does help to divide the work up and make sure that you've got a shared approach as well. Vivian, thank you. I've got your question now. Great. Yeah. We don't set a band. We don't really say that. I think that somebody who's got a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge and understanding would be fine whether they were a band 9 or a band 5, to be honest. So we don't have a minimum, but that thing around having the understanding of the finance function and that ability to stand up for yourself, I think those probably are the 2 for me. Those are the 2 key characteristics. Does that answer your question? Yeah, great, thank you. Joe, hi. Joe Darlington.
Hi, you're right.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I am. When you talk about the 5 days, thank you. Is it 5? You know, you talked about 2 assessors. Is it 5 days per assessor, or 5 or almost, because there's 2 people, it's 2.5 days? I'm trying to work out time commitment.
I'll come back to that later, but basically it'll be about 5 days of your time to do right. It. But that's not hard and fast, and I promise I will cover it later. I promise I will.
Okay.
And if I don't, you can hold me to account.
Okay, I will do.
I'm sure. Thanks, Joe. And thanks for posting that in the chat, Kaya. That's really helpful. Any other questions from anybody at this point? Oh, that's Joe's hand. Okay, great stuff. What we'll do, we'll take a quick break there. So yes, welcome back. Thanks for thanks for being so prompt. What I'm going to talk about now is the approach that we suggest that you take to doing an assessment. This is by no means the only way of doing it. You've heard already from Lynn about how she adopts her approach. It's pretty similar, and let's make a start and go through this together. So again, if I can just check that you can see my screen. That's great. Thanks, Cara. I can see you nodding. That's really helpful. So just to make it a note that my email address is on the presentation. I'm very happy for you to contact me after the event if you have any questions that we don't answer today, although there should be time at the end of this session. Can I just check, Jamie, are you on the call yet? Jamie Hewitt? No, not yet.
Sorry, I'm here, David. Yeah, it's all right.
Excellent. Yeah. Good. I can stop panicking. Thanks, Jamie. So I'll pass over to you in about 20 minutes. You know the score. We've done this before. So good stuff. Thank you. So in terms of the approach, just maybe one moment. So quick outline. I'm going to go through these stages with you today of doing an assessment. We will pick up the questions that a lot of you asked in the first session before the break. Hopefully. If not, then please do ask as we're going along when we come to the end of my presentation. So stage one, the initial evidence pro forma, and this is what Lynn talked about before. I would suggest that you need to have a first draft of the pro forma a minimum of 2 months before the visit, the day you're going to go and visit the organisation. Lynn has already very helpfully explained that the evidence pro formas need to cover all levels. So if you're doing a level 2 assessment, it must be an up-to-date version of level 1 and level 2. If you're doing level 3, you obviously need all 3 levels. You do need to make sure you're using the most up-to-date version of the pro formas. There will be new criteria included after the current deadline. So anybody who's assessing from now on, you need to be using the new version, which are on the website. So you do need to double check that the papers you've been given match up with that. And Lynn kind of touched on this as well. You need to agree with the team how you'll share information. These days, most of the assessments that I do are shared via Teams. The One NHS Finance team will set up a channel for you on their Teams network where you can do that, or you can agree directly with an organisation. I did an assessment recently with Lewisham and Greenwich down in London, who used something called Smart Sheets, which was excellent, I have to say. It was a way of almost like a spreadsheet where you could change data as you're going along. You could put comments in, people could reply to comments, but Teams works just as well. You could do a file transfer using one of the large email file transfers, or God forbid, you could go back to the old days of doing paper files and sitting in an office somewhere plowing through reams and reams and reams of paper. I wouldn't recommend that as a good way of working, though. Lynn mentioned before, and so did Anne-Marie, around having sort of a narrative style, so that the pro forma really needs to explain what each piece of evidence is meant to be showing you, rather than just being a list of what's there. It doesn't need to be a long War and Peace type story, but just an explanation. So we've included the finance director's job description at this point to show that they have responsibility for finance for staff development. We've included 2 or 3 job descriptions, others are available on request, and so on and so forth. Lynn mentioned this around noting any shortfalls, missing evidence, things you're unsure around, and raise that with the organisation. When I've said separately and then jointly, what I mean by that is my preferred way of working, if there's more than one of you doing the assessment, is to do that process individually. And then get together and compare notes. And if there's areas where you disagree, you can have a bit of a conversation before you go back to the organisation. One thing I have done in the past is, well, there's 3 of us, 2 or 3 of us, we might split that up and do a couple of areas each if people are short of time. But it's good to have a sense check on what it is that you're doing. There are some red lines in terms of things that have to be in place now, which I'll come to in a moment. The earlier on, Lynn mentioned about RAG rating, so red, amber, or green. I also include in my assessment something like the blue evidence, so that I have a brag rating rather than a RAG rating. The blue is the kind of things we've already talked about. So, for example, the team pulling the evidence together could very easily say, yes, everyone has job descriptions. I would recommend you check that when you go and do your review with the teams. So. Or everyone's had an appraisal in the last 12 months. again, something you might want to check. You might want to check up. So where evidence it seems to be good, but I want to follow that up, I give that a blue rating, and that's part of my assessment on the day. And then finally, and again, Lynn touched on this, agree a date by which the revised pro forma will be submitted to you. So that first effort, the first go at producing something, a couple of months before you're going to have your visit and your meetings, and then really you want the next stage, the next final version of the pro forma to be with you about a month before. Before I move on, I'm just going to stop there. Does that all make sense? Any questions at that point? Nope. Okay, I should carry on. So these are the red lines we talked about. So in the national meeting, in the national group recently, we recognise that there are some things that absolutely have to be in place at level 1. Again, don't worry about taking notes of these, because we'll send these slides around to you. I'm not going to talk through each of them, but when you're doing a level 2 assessment, you need to ensure that these, and there's 3 pages of them, 3 on each of these criteria needs to be in place and evidence as having been in place across the whole period since the level 1 self-assessment or peer assessment in the Northwest was done. So it's the JD, one exchange finance declaration, and the value maker and the face is a requirement as well. You have to have a health and well-being champion. You must have an up-to-date JD and objectives, and you must have had personal development plans. You have to be registered with professional bodies for CPD and training. We know there are issues with CIMA at the moment. CIMA have put their registration into abeyance. We will allow organisations to record that in their evidence. And we know that for SIPFA, you have to pay for the registration. What we say with SIPFA is, if there's one person in a team of 100 who is SIPFA qualified, we wouldn't expect you to pay £200 to support their CPD. If there are 10 people, we would expect you. Those numbers aren't hard and fast. It's just an example. So it's up to you as an assessor to discuss with the organisation what you think is appropriate in terms of SIPFA recommendation. The SIPFA qualification. There is a finance skills development strategy and action plan in place. That's now a requirement, and also that the resource pack has been used within the organisation. We will be changing these. We haven't yet to include the talent management requirement, which hopefully you're all aware of now, around the inclusive talent management strategy. So those are the red lines. Those will be included in the slides that we'll send out after the session. Again, before I go on to stage 2, everyone happy with those? No issues with anything on those last couple of slides? Nope. Good. Okay. So stage 2, this really should be completed about a month before you visit the organisation. A final version of the evidence schedule. When I say final, it can be changed during the course of the visit and up to the writing of the report, but this is the version you're working with on the day you go into the organisation. And as Lynn made clear, and as we have said, if something isn't recorded, it's not evidence. I won't mention the organisation, but I did do an assessment recently where we had that discussion about there's a requirement that the FD has reviewed FSD activity. And I was told, oh yeah, that happens in our senior team meetings. The senior team meetings weren't minuted. There was no way of proving that. So we got around that by simply saying, can you get the FD to send me an email saying that they have reviewed the process and they're happy with it. So it doesn't have to be a detailed minute. It doesn't have to be something from a meeting. It can be a note from someone just saying that they approve that. Use your common sense as an assessor. I would be very surprised if a finance director was prepared to put something in print that wasn't true. But you need to make sure it's come from the director of finance. So that process of moving from stage 1, the initial evidence pro forma, to stage 2, there's a bit of give and take between you and the organisation in terms of just getting to a point where you're all happy with what's being provided to you. Hopefully that makes sense. If I don't, there's no hands at this point, I'll move on to the next stage. So this is the visit, when you go into the organisation. To answer the question that was asked earlier, You can do it via Teams, but we'd say it's much preferable to do it in person if you can. Obviously, if you're an assessor based in Newcastle and you're assigned to Assessor Trust in Exeter, we're not going to insist you travel all the way down there. Hopefully, Sophie and colleagues wouldn't make that sort of appointment. It'd be a bit impractical, but the preference is that you do the visit in person because you get a much better feel for an organisation when you're there in person. You get to see what the place of work looks like. You just get a much better feeling. Again, we recognise at the moment with the financial constraints that might be tricky, but it would always be the preference. What I would say is that in this list of people you need to see on the rest of the slide, if for any reason, for example, the finance director is unavailable on the day, you can see them via Teams later if that helps with the process. There are a certain number of people you have to see during your assessment day. They are there on the slide. It's really important that you see the finance director. It's really important that you see around 25% of the finance team, a minimum of 3 people. And as Lynn said before, you should choose the staff. So what I always do is I ask for a staff listing, and I make sure I pick a range of people from whether they're qualified, whether they're studying, whether they're not studying, try and get a different range of seniorities. If you can tell from the spreadsheet people's diversity backgrounds, you can try and make sure you get a different mix of people that way as well. It's really important that you have a good mix and that you pick those people. Otherwise, you may be given the people who are briefed as to what to say to you on the day when you get there. So it's a good idea for you to pick the individuals from the team list. You can see them in groups. Sometimes you have to. So I did an assessment recently where there's a staff of 150 people. There was no way I was going to see 25% of 150 people in individual meetings. So you can do them in groups. You need to use your skills a bit there to make sure everyone has a chance to talk to you. You need to make sure that you don't have people sitting in the corner silently saying nothing. But that's the sort of thing you can manage if you've got experience of chatting in groups. You do need to see budget holders. I would make quite a strong case you should try and see clinical budget holders if you can, because they're the people who tend to be most critical of the finance function. I mentioned Lewisham and Greenwich before. They were very brave when I went to do their assessment and put up somebody who they knew was a critic. But actually, we had a really good conversation with that person, and their praise for the things they did well was really good, and the comments that they had for things they could do better was really helpful. So it's not for you to pick who you see, but I would try to definitely budget holders, and if you can, try and get at least 1 clinical budget holder. You need to see 2 people at level 2 and 3 at level 3. For a level 3 accreditation, you will also need to have a chat with the chief exec. And in the document that Kaya has shared, there are some sample questions for each of those groups of people, just to give you an idea of the sort of things you should be asking. You don't have to ask them all. It's not a checklist. It's definitely not an audit, but it does give you some idea on who you need to talk to. And then at the end of the day, you need to have a final outcome meeting with probably the people who led on the gathering the evidence and talking to you about the pro forma. And in my experience, a senior member of the team, the FD or the deputy, will want to join that meeting as well, so they hear the feedback firsthand. I'm going to cover that last meeting in a little more detail. Are there any questions around any of that at this stage? Vicky, I've seen your question in the chat. I'll come back to that at the end if that's okay. Great, thank you. Yeah, I've talked about the sample questions. I've talked about the discussions. They're not interviews. We're not the CQC. We're not holding people's feet to the fire. It's very much a discussion rather than an audit style approach. And then one top tip: if you are meeting by teams, do set up each individual meeting as a separate meeting on Teams. We did an assessment a couple of years ago now where we had one meeting all day, and it was a nightmare. People kept coming in, going out, coming in at the wrong time. So do set up each meeting as a separate meeting on Teams. In terms of stage 4, the outcome, this is a really important part of the process. And before you leave the organisation, you must have this meeting with the relevant people. What I would say to you is that there are 3 potential outcomes. One would be you've been successful, and as an assessor or as an assessment team, you are going to recommend to FLC that the organisation is accredited. You can't say they will be. That's not your decision as an assessor. That's for the FLC to sign off. But you can say, as far as you're concerned, you'll be signing them off. You can say that they're almost successful. There's just 1 or 2 things they need to sort out. Maybe a couple of bits of evidence are missing that you're fairly confident they can provide, and ask them to give you that information within a week or so of the meeting, or they're not quite ready yet. I can give you a first-hand example of something that would fall into that latter category. Again, another assessment I did recently, they'd got a fantastic new finance skills strategy, which had been in place about a month at the time of the assessment. So we had to say to them, it's a great strategy, but it's not embedded yet. You need to come back to us in 6 months' time, show us some of the things that you've done to make sure that strategy is really well in place, and then we'll sign you off at that point. And they were very happy to go away and do that. It wasn't an issue. They understood, and that's not, again, it's not saying that they'd failed. It was saying they weren't quite in a place yet to be signed off. Failure really isn't an outcome. It really would be about how you will help them move from where they are to where they need to be to achieve that assessment. And I would say that you have to be clear before you leave, so that when you send in your email after the meetings or your report, or whatever it happens to be, there are no surprises. I'm just going to pick up Judith's question at this point. That's a good question. What I would do, Judith, is I would try to have at least 1 meeting at the place of work with a number of people, and then on my last assessment we had 2 of those, and then we did 1 via Teams. Mixing people up in Teams and in the room doesn't work. So I would say that, yeah, if most people are working from home, then you can do that via a Teams assessment. But I would try and base yourself in the organisation for the day and have at least that introductory meeting, the sign-off meeting, and 1 of the group meetings in person on the day. Does that make sense, Judith?
Yes, thanks, David. I was just trying to if people are picked and then you've got, say somebody's off poorly, so you can't get them revved up to come in to be interviewed, then they'd have to do it via Teams. And I was just checking that wasn't an issue because
no, not at all. No.
Obviously, most of us are not in the office at all these days.
Yeah, and if someone's off poorly, obviously the organisation can replace them. We wouldn't expect someone to be dragged in off their sick bed to do an interview. Yeah. Thanks, Jude. I'm going to pick up Peter's question as well before I move on. Absolutely, yes. So I'm not going to mention the organisation that I talked about by name just now, but yeah, we've worked with them throughout that 6-month period just to make sure that they were clear what was needed from us, and we're gathering the relevant information. So yeah, it's a supportive process. You're not going to walk off and leave them in the dark and then sort of come back to them later. Kirsty.
Would you normally gauge from looking at the evidence whether or not they're ready or not? And I suppose if from looking at that evidence when you get it, a month before or even prior to that, the view is actually it appears that they're not there, you would then have that conversation then to actually try and delay it or get the evidence beforehand, etc. Yeah,
absolutely. If the evidence pro forma suggested they were way off beam, then I would go back and have a conversation saying we need to delay the visit until the point when you're ready. Once many years ago, I went to do an assessment in the Northwest organisation, and the evidence was basically a tissue of lies. The people involved are no longer in the NHS, but I'm still not going to mention where it was. That was quite a difficult conversation, and we had to say we're going to stop the assessment now. We'll talk to you about how we can move on from this. But that's why the meeting with people is really important, just to make sure that that what you've been told is correct. But yeah, if the evidence isn't there, then delay the visit. Yeah. Okay, thank you. All really good questions. In terms of the report, and again, Lynn has hinted at this, so I would absolutely recommend you write it certainly within 2 weeks, within a day or so if you can. There are 4 parts to the report. There's your report as assessors, there's an organisational introduction, and on the guidance document is made clear what that should be. You need the final agreed evidence schedule, so that would be the version I talked about at stage 2, plus any changes you've made during the visit. And there's a pro forma to be signed off that just shows what the situation is in terms of accreditation with the different institutes, so CIMA, SIPFA, ACCA, and so on. It's really important that all 4 of those parts are agreed by all 4 parties. So what I tend to do, and the press is doing this at the moment, when I write a report, I agree with my fellow assessors, or if they've written it, we all agree it together, and then we send that off, and we make sure that the organisation is happy with it as well. That will be as simple as making sure that everyone's names and job titles are spelt correctly and are correct, making sure that the information you've included around the number of staff, the turnover, all those sort of things are correct as well. But it's a joint report that you have you hold the pen on that, and it's your final decision as to what the report includes, but it should be agreed. And you submit that by one of the deadlines, which is on the screen there. I got it right this time. So 30th of April, 31st of August, or 31st of December. Those deadlines don't move because they're meant to be sort of shortly before an FLC meeting, so that Sophie and Kaya and the team have time to pull the papers together and submit those to the FLC in due course. There's a lot of information in the document that Kaya shared before around how to write the report. If people have questions now or later, then please drop me an email and we can pick those up. So key factors, really can't stress this enough. It's not a pass or fail process. It's developmental. You're there to support the organisation, help them get through it. But you need to make, and I'll come to this again at the end of my presentation, it's absolutely on your terms. You as assessors are the ones who are saying whether you think they're ready. The question of time, I would say around about 5 days, and that's not 5 solid days. So as an example, the report that I'm writing now, I spent a couple of hours yesterday afternoon writing the report, sent that to my fellow assessors. They've come back to me this morning. I'll spend a bit of time after this meeting sorting the report out. Then I'll send it off to the organisation. So it's not a solid day's work, but it'll take about a day, 3 days to the pre-visit work, 1 day for the actual visit, obviously, and then 1 day to write the report up. It's a shame Lynn's dropped off the course. You have to go to a meeting, but hopefully that sort of chimes with her experience as well of how long it takes. It's really important that you get a feel from the outset that the senior staff in the organisation are committed to this process. Not necessarily the finance director, but I would certainly say you want either the deputy or the FD to be committed to this and giving it their weight and their support. And if you have any feeling around that's not quite working properly, I think you need to let people know that that's not going to work out. We've said time and time again, it's not a CQC visit. They're discussions. They're not really interviews. They're meetings. You're there to support people. And when it comes to it, at the end of the day, you're signing things off with the organisation, but absolutely on your terms. So if there are things you're unhappy about and you don't think the team is ready the organisation is ready to be approved, you need to explain to them why that is, and then support them moving from where they are to get into that position. So that's me done. I've picked up a few questions going along. Vicky, I didn't answer your question because I don't know the answer. Certainly, I have done Northwest and National. I will have done 4 this year, but my role is different because I'm an SDN person, so I've got time to do this. Kaya, I don't think we'd be asking somebody who's holding down a job in the NHS to do 4 assessments in a year, maximum of 2, I would think.
Yeah, I agree. 4 seems quite a lot, so yeah, 2.
Yeah, okay, great stuff. Did I answer the questions that I think it was Joe and Peter had around time and other issues? Yeah, Good stuff. Okay. As I say, you've got my email address. If something occurs to you, Sang, over to you, sir. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what are the dates of the assessments? It's just flashed up on screen before. Is that right?
Yeah. You're testing my memory now. Let me just go back.
December.
So the 30th of April, 31st of August, and the 31st of December. Those are the deadlines by which you have to get the papers into the colleagues at NHS Finance. Obviously, you can do the assessment at any point during the year. They're just the last dates when they can accept papers for the FLC.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions at this point? No. Okay. So, lastly, this afternoon, I'm going to pass you over to Jamie, who has done quite a few assessments for us over the years and a number of presentations. And Jamie is going to run through briefly with you around why you should get involved, what the benefits are. Jamie, no pressure, but I have promised we'll be finished before 4 o'clock. I'm sure we will. I've seen your presentation before.
No problem, David. I'll stop me if I ramble, but I'm sure I'll be finished before then. So
great stuff. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Yes, I'll share my screen. Can everyone see this? Can you give me 1 or 2 thumbs up if you can? Yeah, thank you. So I've been asked to share my experiences as an assessor, particularly the positive experiences and why get involved. And do feel free to ask questions as we go along. Unmute your mics or put questions in the chat as well. This is much better if it's a bit more interactive. So we're going to cover, I'm going to talk a bit about my accreditation journey with my organisation, Sussex Community, and also my journey as an assessor and how that went along with the accreditation journey as well. I'm going to talk about what being an assessor involves, although David has covered a lot of that already, so I'll probably skip some of those slides in the interests of time. And then, finish off with why get involved, what are the positive reasons to get involved, and try and persuade you to be enthusiastic assessors as I am. So I'd say that assessment is a time commitment, but it's so much more of a time commitment if it's left to a very small group of enthusiastic assessors to do all of the assessments. So that this process does rely on numbers of people coming forward and being eager to help out with the process and sharing the workload and making it less of a burden and more of a positive experience. So talking firstly about my accreditation journey. So Sussex Community, this is our team back in 2018. That's when we started out on our level 1 accreditation journey. And at that time, there were no accredited organisations in the Southeast. So we set out to be the first, and it was interesting at the time. There was no sort of peers to talk to who'd been through that process already, but we gathered the evidence together and we were successful at the end of 2018 in getting our level 1. That's our level 1 certificate. Having done the level 1, we've established that there wasn't a huge difference in the standards between level 1 and level 2. Really, the difference is the fact that level 2 is audited, is assessed, if you like. So there's a need to record the evidence in a format that can be checked and assessed by someone else. So we took a few months to do that, and we did our level 2 assessment late in 2019, and that's us getting our level 2 certificate from at the Value Makers event. So David was our assessor then. David came down to Brighton to do that assessment back then. And it was a bit stressful, and we had to give a very thorough review at the time, but we also found it quite a positive experience as well. It was a chance to showcase our department in a positive light. It was a chance to talk about some of the initiatives that we had and to celebrate them. And we're very pleased to obviously get the accreditation at the end of that process. And pretty much immediately after that, we were asked to become assessors on the back of being a level 2 organisation, which my colleague Tim and I agreed to. And not very long after this, we did our first assessment, which was another trust in our patch who'd got to that level already. So more on that in a moment. But then we had COVID in 2020, and it was a couple of years really before we picked the whole process up again. But we decided, as we're coming out of the COVID period, to really go for our level 3. So it was David again and Jackie who did our level 3 assessment early in 2022. And actually in the meantime as well, between 2020 and 2022, we did a couple more assessments as assessors. So I suppose what the point I'd make is that becoming an assessor didn't just happen. It sort of came about as a result of our own accreditation journey. We were asked to be assessors when we were level 2. We did a few level 2 assessments, then got a level 3, and we did a level 3 assessment after that. So the two things kind of went hand in hand. We so just talk a bit about the assessments that we have done. So it's 5 to date, and we've actually just agreed to do another one later this year. So it seems like a lot, but that's actually worked out about 1 a year. So and I think that's about right, because as David has said, it's quite a big time commitment, so you wouldn't really want to do a lot more than that. But over a period of 5 years, we've visited a variety of organisations, either in person or on Teams. They all passed, so I think I can talk about them all, because it was all a positive outcome for the various organisations. Kenton Medway said we did that assessment quite shortly after getting our own accreditation. In a way, their application was way better than ours, and we learned a lot from doing their assessment. But we managed to get in there first and be the first organisation. Then obviously 2020 was the COVID year, and we were asked to do an accreditation of Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt, which is a small trust on the Welsh-English borders, at the end of that year. So that was a very different experience from the Kenton Medway one, because it was obviously it was over Teams, and it was a completely different kind of organisation in a different part of the country. So I think we learned a lot from doing that assessment in a different way, but also learning a lot about an organisation in a different part of the country, which made it a different sort of experience. And I think in both of those cases, we got a lot of ideas from those two organisations we were able to bring back to our own and help with our own accreditation process. 2021, we were asked to do Kent ICB. That was a different sort of assessment again. That was at the time when the ICBs were first being established. So it was 7 CCGs merging into one organisation during a time of COVID, when everyone was working at home, and all the challenges that they had trying to build a team from 7 completely different organisations merging into one when they didn't actually see each other that much. And they had some quite innovative solutions around team building and socializing in a remote environment, and it was really interesting to hear how they'd made a success of that and built the team in challenging circumstances, as quite unsettling circumstances for some of them. So that was again a really positive learning experience, and really good to engage with them at that busy time. Shrewsbury and Telford we did a couple of years ago now, and that was one of those organisations like the one that David just talked about a few minutes ago. So when we first received their application, it was very much the case that they had a strong application, but they weren't quite ready yet. And we had to have that difficult conversation with them at that time about what was missing from their bid, what we needed them to go away and provide more evidence on before we'd be ready to come out and do the visit. But we had that conversation, and I'm pleased to say 3 months later they resubmitted, and we did the application, and it was a positive outcome. And then after we got our level 3 in 2022, we were asked to be level 3 assessors, and we did Kenton Medway Partnership Trust again, and they passed with flying colours, and that was about a year ago. And that was different. That was the first level 3 assessment that we'd done. It's probably quite a rambling introduction, but I think what I try to say about this is every organisation that I've been to has been really interesting. We've learned a lot from them. We've come away from ideas, made contact to some of those organisations that have been useful later on. And I can't think of any other real scenario in our working lives where you'd get to really immerse yourself in another NHS finance department, maybe in a different part of the country or a completely different kind of organisation, and just find out how they go about organise themselves and team building and setting up their finance department. I think it's very easy in the NHS to work in your own organisation and be quite siloed in your thinking. So, it's been quite eye-opening for me doing these various assessments around the country and learning a bit about these different organisations. So I will move on. So I think this is probably the bit that I'll skip over slightly, except to say that yes, it is a big time commitment. So, I mean, David mentioned the 5 days. I'd probably say I probably spent more like 3 on each assessment that I've done, and I don't think that we've been slapdash in the way we've applied the guidance. I think we just tried to think carefully about how we build up an accreditation team and share the work out among ourselves. So the way we've tended to do it is that, I might do the early stage of reviewing the application and the evidence. Myself and the other assessors will actually do the interviews together on the assessment day. And then one of my colleagues will write the accreditation reports. And so not all of the work sits with one person. We'll split it out amongst ourselves. But obviously there are things like the interviews with the CFO or the chief executives. You probably all want to be involved in that. So just finding smart ways to share out the burden of the work amongst yourselves and try and do that as efficiently as you can. And I think probably from that, I'd say certainly the last couple that I've done, I probably spent no more than 3 days on them personally, but as a team, it would work out more like 5. Yeah, so the question came up before, is it like an audit? I say I'm an ex-auditor myself. I'd say it is and it isn't. So there are some similarities to it. You're looking at evidence. You've got a checklist. You're ticking off whether you meet the standard or not. But it's not really about trying to fail people or catch them out. It's about supporting them and helping them improve and reach the standards and helping them to celebrate success and learn from best practice. So yeah, there's some similarities to an audity type approach, but it's very unlike an audit in what you're trying to do here. Really, you're not trying to fail people, you're trying to support them, getting them through the process. And that's what we want. We want everyone to reach level, at least level 2 and, demonstrate the values of accreditation. Yeah, skip past these ones. I think we've already covered all of this. Yeah, share the workload out with at least one other colleague. Make sure you're using the One NHS Finance team. I think that's particularly useful if you've got something that's marginal and you're not sure if it's a pass or a fail. That there is the option to go back to the One NHS Finance team and the national panel as well to seek advice on that. I think, fortunately, most of the ones that I've done has been pretty clear cut. They've been very strong applications and they've passed easily. But there are scenarios, where it might be on the margins and you're not sure if they meet the standard or not. And that's the time when you might want to seek advice. So I'd say you're not alone in that. There is a structure out there to support you and give you advice if you're in that situation. And make sure you use it and make sure, as I say, you share the workload out with other colleagues. So turning then to why get involved, well, I suppose the first reason I'd say is just reading the definition of what accreditation is all about. So it is about fostering a great place to work, creating a culture where staff feel appreciated and successes are celebrated. And if they're values that you share and that's what you want to see in NHS finance and in NHS finance teams across the country, I think that's something that you should want to get involved in. And it's good to be part of that agenda. Another very good reason to get involved is if you are seeking accreditation yourself, it is a requirement of the standards. So at level 2, the standard is that you put forward an assessor who has as a minimum shadowed an assessment. At level 3, you have to have someone who's actually carried out an assessment or made themselves available to carry out an assessment at least. So the point is, to get the accreditation, you need to be actively engaged in the process. You need to put someone forward who's willing and supportive to be an assessor and part of the assessment process. So that's the second reason to get involved. Third reason, as I tried to convey earlier, it's understanding another finance team, learning other perspectives from, perhaps, you might work in an acute or a commissioner, but, perhaps you might get to visit a completely different kind of organization, like an ambulance trust or a community trust, just getting to understand different perspectives, how different parts of the country operate, and coming away with ideas and making contacts from them, and perhaps sharing some of your own ideas with other organizations. I've personally found this very rewarding, just being able to share some of what we've done and learning from what the organizations that I've visited have done as well. And I'd say, it's really good meeting the people. So I've met other finance professionals through this process, made some contacts that have been useful at other stages when I've wanted advice on other things that I've been working on. And I think this is probably another way where it's quite unlike an audit as well. It's when doing this assessment and having those interviews, you're going to come across different perspectives, and not everyone you speak to is going to be really positive. You need to be comfortable with dealing with nuance there. You might find a couple of people who are dissatisfied in their work, but other people are satisfied, and it's about coming to a rounded view and getting a feel for how that feels as a place to work to the whole department. And you get that from talking to that, as David said, that wide cross section of at least 25% of the department. I think meeting one disgruntled person doesn't mean the organization fails. And I've probably come across that in every organization I've been to. You meet at least one person who's unhappy. You've got to put that into perspective with everyone else you meet as well, and being able to come to those rounded views based on who you meet. So I've come to the end of my session. So I was asked to talk about reasons to get involved. So I say it's really interesting and enjoyable. I think you learn a lot from the process. You meet a lot of new people. I see you're contributing to an agenda which is about making NHS finance a great place to work and helping make it a better place to work by being part of the process and supporting more organisations to become accredited. And if you want to be accredited yourself, it's something that you have to do. So that's a very good reason to be involved. So that's everything I was going to say, and I'm happy to take any questions on that or have any comments.
Thanks, Jamie. Great stuff. Kirsty, you have a question?
Hiya, Jamie.
Hiya.
I just wanted to check. So you've mentioned about we a few times in there. How many assessors have you got at Sussex Community?
So the regular assessors are me and Tim Blatt, you've probably met, who's one of my counterparts in the finance team. We have also, we tend to have somebody along as shadowing as well. So a couple of occasions there's been somebody else from our team who just wants to get experience of being part of an assessment, and they've perhaps come along and supported. The last assessment that we did, Aflac, you probably met from UHSX. He was a shadow assessor, and we've got a shadow assessor coming to join the next assessment that we're going to do later this year. So yeah, normally 3.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I think it's worth just saying, because you don't necessarily get to assess with people from the same organisations. I think Tim and Jamie have formed a nice little team that does a lot of work together. It may be I tend to assess with different people depending where I go. There's no requirement for there to be a team from your organisation who are prepared to do the assessments. You'll be paired up with other people if necessary. If there are colleagues who want to work with you, that's fine, and I'm sure that Kaya and Sophie and others will try to facilitate that as best as they can. Any more questions for Jamie or myself or Anne-Marie, who's still on the call, before we bring things to an end? Nope. Okay. Oh, Joe.
Just one. This is apparently Sophie's emailed both myself and Simon, who's on the call, because we've registered to be assessors on this course and asked if we want to be involved in a assessment up to December. So I suppose my main questions were some of them, and I think what you're saying, if you're level 1, which we are, you can be assessor, but we'd probably want to be a shadow assessor first time. And I guess from my point of view, I would think it'd probably be good. Bear in mind, we want to go for our level 2 assessment. So yeah, that's kind of what my questions were to Sophie.
So I'll leave that with Kaya to ask Sophie to get back directly to you, Joe. What I would say is that we've always said in the Northwest, we're happy for colleagues to come and shadow any of our assessments as well. Barnsley hopping across the Pennines isn't that far, is it? So you're very welcome to come and shadow one of ours if there's nothing happening nationally that's appropriate for you to shadow on. So we can get that sorted, I'm sure, but I'll leave it to Sophie to answer you directly on that one if that's okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions that anyone wants to ask at this point? Okay, thank you. So I'd like to thank Anne-Marie and Lynn and Jamie for their input this afternoon and their really interesting and informative sessions. I'd like to thank Kaya and the NHS Finance team for supporting us as well as they always do. I would encourage you to get involved. I think you heard this afternoon that although there's a bit of work involved, actually I think the benefits far outweigh that work. I think the connections you make, the things you learn, the things that you can steal with pride to take back into your own organisation are really, really beneficial. Thank you for your involvement. Please do drop my email will be on the presentations you'll get. I know that Sophie and Kai will happily take questions as well. And if when you are asked to do an assessment you have any questions, again, please get in touch with Jamie or myself or Lynn or any other assessors. We're a friendly little team. We'll always do our best to help you, and you're never on your own. There's always plenty of support out there. So there we go. I finished 3 minutes early as promised. I hope it's been a good session, and thanks for your support, and we'll see you all again very soon. Take care, everybody.